how it shifts, and then how the Rays kind of react to it, because maybe they're in a Cleveland-like situation where Cleveland did the sell-off a year ago. That's why, we traded Savale to you guys, and then we tried to rebound the next year. So it'll be fun to see him go. The problem for me is giving the Rays a B- is just going to make me look dumb in 5 years when it's like I didn't know Ryan.
You are Locked On Rays, your daily Tampa Bay Rays podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Rays podcast. Today we are joined by Jeff Ellis, who is the host of Locked On Guardians and MLB Draft extraordinaire. I imagine the last couple of weeks have been pretty hectic for you between that and then the trade deadline, the All-Star game, all that wrapped into one, basically.
Yeah, this is definitely our busiest season by far. Between the first time ever the franchise had the number one overall pick in Cleveland, and then the deadline, and them having the best record in baseball, as everyone predicted, of course, or at least the best record in the American League. So it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for your patience as we tried to schedule this. It's been a bit crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. So getting into the 2024 draft, how would you compare it talent-wise and depth-wise compared to previous drafts, maybe last year, the last couple of years, just the strength of this draft class compared to previous iterations?
So I think when you're looking at this class, the strength was at the top. I definitely thought like the top 8 or so players this year could compare very favorably to the top 8 or so of any of the last few classes, depending on kind of your view on it. Maybe the top guys, some people didn't like quite as much as a year ago. Other people did. But when you look at like 3 of the last 4 years, I think, especially that top of the class was as good as we've seen. People tend to forget Jackson Holliday was not the slam dunk number 1 overall pick at the time. He was a guy who, even up to the day of the draft, Brooks Lee started the day as the favorite to go number 1 that year. So it really was a good class at the top. And then I think that extended to about 12 to 13 guys. And then it got a little more shaky, if I'm being honest, at that point. And one of the big reasons was that I felt like there wasn't necessarily an elite prep pitcher in this class. There was tons of great depth pitching wise, prep wise. And then the college class, you had like a good center group of like 3 to 4 names that were intriguing. And then it was kind of flat. And then it was a lot of guys who were maybe more back end guys, or the traits type where you're kind of hoping you can do better by them. So the college pitching felt weak. The prep pitching had depth, but didn't necessarily have high ceiling. And then college hitting was great, but it quickly got picked over. And then prep pitching did not have depth. So all of that led to it to be a class that lacked the overall depth of a few years, especially kind of in the middle. I think it evened out once you got to about the 3rd or 4th round, but I would argue from about 21 to about the 4th round, it was weaker than any class I've seen since about 2013.
Right. And getting to the Rays draft, their top pick was Theo Gillen, a high schooler out of Westlake High School, 18th overall pick. What did you make of that selection, and how you think he fits into the Rays' plans?
So he's really fascinating. Like, if he didn't have health issues, I'm just kind of scrolling up to see exactly what my rank on him was. He's a guy who kept moving up. So that's, as a positive to Rays fans. I ended up having 26th. But like, if he didn't have the string of health issues, he might have been top 10 talent. He might have even been the best prep player in this class. One can make the case that, he has a great approach. He has power. He has speed. I hate putting a 5-tool label on anyone, and his arm is not grand. So it's not a 5-tool profile in that way, but it's just so he missed time with a torn labrum, which I think is interesting. I have never seen as many torn labrums as I did in this year's class. I know we all focus on pitcher injuries, but it feels like high school kids are having labrum surgery at a much higher rate. Like, that's just one of those things to maybe keep in the back of your head when we focus on how much pitchers are getting hurt. I think we're also seeing it more in hitters. We're just not realizing it. But he had a labrum, then a knee, and then a groin strain this year. And maybe it's because I'm a Guardians fan, and the Guardians spent the last 5 years drafting guys who would have gone higher if it wasn't for health, that they kind of viewed it as a way to get a market inefficiency. Unfortunately for Cleveland, all of those guys have continued to get hurt. That I'm just a little bit more leery with health. So that's why he was 26 on my board, but it's not because of talent. Like talent-wise, I would have, this might be sacrilege to some, but I'd have put him up there with Connor Griffin, with Slade Caldwell, and with Bryce Rainier. I think talent-wise, he is in that tier. So if you're the Rays and you have a lot of players and you just want to swing on some potential high ceiling, I think he makes a lot of sense. I didn't think it was a bad pick, even though it was higher and I had him. I can understand the logic of it.
Yeah. And then getting to their second pick, second baseman out of Kentucky, Pitre, who is Canadian born, I believe. What did you make of that selection at 58th overall?
I was a little bit surprised. I got to be honest. I thought that he was my co-host on Locked On Guardians, Justin Latta, loves him. So we had some disagreements on Pitre. But he was a guy who I didn't necessarily think was going to be a second round talent. He does everything well, right? Like he runs well. He had a surprising amount of pop in the Cape a year ago, I want to say. And wood bat success for a lot of teams is hugely important. In the Cape, for those who aren't familiar, the Cape Cod League is the number one, college summer league, and it's the elite of the elite go there. And I think for a lot of teams, and I think in this case for the Rays, there's extra value in that because this season was nutty in college baseball and it was hard to judge and evaluate players. So guys who stood out in the Cape, who were able to kind of jump in and perform well there, I think all got significant bumps in terms of where they were. He's maybe not the biggest high ceiling guy, but he just he runs solid. He's a good hitter. There's a little bit of pop there. I think he just kind of one of those players who does a little bit of everything and might be better than the sum of his parts. Like I said, it's a little bit of a surprise. I thought he was going to be under slot, and then he was almost the full slot. So the Rays strongly kind of disagreed with my assessment, and that's fine. They're better at this than I am. So I would definitely, I can see why, again, they went with him, especially if you think that, he is someone who could maybe move to a more, I don't know if he's going to stick it short. I know he played some short. I know he played a lot of second base this year. Maybe they think that he could potentially move to a center field. We see a lot more of that second base to center field transition. And, there could be value there. I think the Rays have kind of swung for the fences on center fielders and have gotten mixed results. So maybe they see a guy who could potentially play center field, who can do a bit of everything and be a little more safe and grounded.
And you mentioned, the Rays maybe having a different proprietary ranking than yourself and some of the other experts out there. That just seems to be the Rays' MO, is that they do things a little bit differently and against the grain. Have you kind of pinned down on what their general draft strategy is? I remember a couple of years ago, they really surprised by drafting Xavier Isaac, and so far it looks like it's working at the minor league level for him, and he could be a grade A prospect or a grade A talent down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I completely blew that one. I was like, what are they doing? And, I'll be the first to admit when I swing and miss badly. And that's when I totally I mean, at the time I would have been, I guarantee I was critical. I don't necessarily remember, but I was likely critical, and they saw something and they jumped on it. And it's one of those things I wonder too, how much advanced data kind of changes things nowadays and how much you can see things that you can't, okay, for instance, Jack Caglione, everyone knows him. Mm-hmm. And yes, the numbers are fantastic, and he hit 400 and his walk rate was up and he hit a lot of home runs, but he also had the worst chase rate in college baseball. And when people saw him and thought he's a two-way player with these numbers, he should go first overall. Why did he go 6? It's because the chase rate. And that's the data that you don't always get to see. You don't always know. It's not always readily available and out there. So I wonder with some of these guys if, and again, with high school stuff, it's not like high school chase rate matters that much because, most of the guys, someone like Xavier Isaacs is facing during the season are guys who aren't even going to go on to college, let alone, the big leagues. But it's one of those things that's just a great job by their scouts. I do think they are a team that looks, again, heavily at traits. I do think, the Cape Cod is one of those things that showed up. I'm sure we'll get to him. Their third rounder, I didn't rank him, but I wrote him up because I liked him. I only went to 60 this year, but then I did 10 bonus players I liked. And it's that was a guy who stood out. And I think one of the things you're looking at with them for sure is, oh, sorry, here comes a cat. Max exit velocity. That's Xavier Isaacs, and also probably likely, their third rounder we'll get to. But just having some of those traits, some of the growth potential with the high school kids. And I think with the college, it's a lot of contact rate stuff. Brendan Taylor, I believe, had solid contact rate with some good power. Not great, but good power and solid contact rates. So I think in some respects, they almost look at different things for prep players than college players.
Are you about FanDuel? I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sporting like we want them to. But FanDuel lets me and others keep the sports going whenever everyone wants. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That is right, something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades, SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business, and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com and their free Trade Master program. Let's remind you, join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com/TM and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com.
Yeah, and before we get to that third round pick, interesting news that came out recently. Their basically bonus pick in the second round, competitive balance pick, 66th overall, Tyler Bell, shortstop out of Illinois, has decided not to sign and to go to the University of Kentucky. And I believe the pick value was around $1.26 million.
Yeah.
How rare is it that a guy drafted that high with that amount of money staring him in the face and he goes off to college?
Oh, it's really weird. I got to be honest, because we had two of them. The Brewers lost Chris Lavonis, who was also a competitive balance B pick as well this year. And then the Mets didn't offer Jackson Jelkin. There's health and then character concerns there. He was a ninth rounder. And then trying to Ryan Prager, who decided to go back to school. And 4 guys is like unheard of. Like typically there's maybe 1 to 2. And I just, I wonder if, because you say he's a Kentucky commit, right?
Yeah, Kentucky.
So they really were trying to, kill Kentucky up the middle this year with this draft between Petrie and Bell. But I wonder with the way things are shifting, if this is a changing of the guard to some degree. It's such a hard situation to be in for the agent because it's not a good look if they had a deal in place and the player backs out. It makes it hard for teams because all of these deals are like outside of, I think Lavonis might not have been 100% a deal on the table with the Brewers because they drafted a bunch of day 3 guys. Like they weren't sure they could get him is essentially now you can go back and look and see that. But it looks like the Rays drafted him with the intention of signing him. I mean, yes, look at the comp pick next year. Look at a bonus pick. So they'll have, an extra pick for next year's class, which might be better in some regards in terms of pick 66 and it'll probably be closer to pick 70 something, but still it'll probably have a little more value. I don't know. I wonder if we're seeing some changes with NIL money. I wonder if we're seeing some things like that. It's really weird because the Rays, I can't recall outside of Drew Rasmussen, I believe was the last time this happened to them. And that was all medical based. And they still liked him enough to go out and trade for him later on. But yeah, it was a bit of a surprise. Like the rumor was that that Bell had a landing spot somewhere in the second round that he was going to sign. And then all of a sudden it shifted. So I think it is a loss. I'm curious to see how this, I feel like we're at a fulcrum point where we're going to see some changes because we've never 4 guys, 3 who are going to turn to picks next year. That's never happened.
Interesting. So now moving on to the third round pick, which hopefully maybe gets Rays fans excited. The fact that it was a catcher selected, and that is something that the Rays are hangering for going forward, having a guy that can be a stable spot at that position. Nathan Fleming out of St. Joseph High School. What do you like? What stands out about his gameplay?
Power. He's super young. He's only 17. But I know power is a fun thing to talk about. And he went as a 17-year-old, he went to the MLB Draft Combine and had some of the biggest exit velocities and some of the hardest hit baseballs of the entire class. He's one of the youngest players in the class. It was one of those picks. Him and Luke Sennard in round 3 were really the ones I'm like, oh man, those are the guys I hope would slide to Cleveland. It just if your model likes players who are young. He's not going to turn 18 until November. Let's see, I have here that his exit velocity was 112.4, which is just phenomenal for a kid who's still 17. And then he's from Alberta. Like, not a lot of guys are originally from Alberta that we see. We see a lot more of like the Ontario and the Ottawa kids, which I know Ottawa is in Ontario, right? I'm not the best at my Canadian geography, so I apologize now to any Canadian listeners. But he was just a nice high ceiling bat who really popped at the combine. I don't know if he'll stay at catcher. I don't know if he'll move off. But he's kind of a big, malleable, clay ball. And I don't have the right words, but it's power, it's youth, and it's kind of that ceiling and growth. And I thought he was a really fun, interesting player. And, I do think he has the ability to stay a catcher. I don't know. He's 17, so who knows how he's going to develop and how he's going to grow and get bigger. But I think there's a chance for a catcher with plus power, and that's just a rare trait to find.
That's good to hear. Now, going rounds 4 through 20, any players that stuck out to you in particular, or unique selections from the other, 15 plus guys that were taken in that area?
There are quite a few. Like, I kind of liked Tony Santa Maria. I was shocked that he didn't get the full $150K for slot, that they only had to pay him $50,000. Like, he just did, again, a guy who did about a bit of everything. Might be just a backup utility guy, but like, I was surprised that no one jumped on him earlier if he was not going to even take the full slot. Transferred into Rutgers this year and played really well. Jaden Volker, like, again, Mike Host and I have been texting about him pretty consistently. He's a guy who's gone through like a complete body change since high school, and he is big and strong and throws, mid 90s to touch upper 90s. And he looks like no one's safe. No one's no doubt, but he looks like a very safe relief prospect, especially in that range where you're like, okay, that might even save them money, because I'm trying to remember if he was close to senior sign or senior age or not. But either way, he was big, strong kid who's already changed his body, added velocity, and looked like a really good reliever. Jason Kenzel is another like fun developmental pitcher. He's probably a reliever, but the fastball is one of those things that just really stood out for him. If you're looking, like, Kenzel and Volker are just fun relievers to put together. And then Knowles and Kamitz, who I'm probably saying his name wrong, like, Kamitz just pitched well at Oregon State. And he's coming from a program where the fundamentals are solid and put in. Chance at a back-end starter. I kind of expected him to take more of a leap this year, and he didn't. So maybe the Rays see some traits. And then Nate Knowles, I think it was his curveball, stood out. Not the biggest kid, but had some great production. I know he was an underslot guy for them, but I thought the 4th round was actually a fair round for him. If you're betting on upside and growth, he's not the biggest kid, which I know some people don't love, especially at a right-hander. But I think he's got legit starter traits. I liked him more than, outside of, I thought he was their 4th best player in this class. Like, even though I don't believe he was paid like that, and I don't believe he was always ranked that way across the board. But I really liked Nate Knowles. I just thought he had a lot of starter traits for a smart team to build on and to keep. And when you have a college player who has one above average secondary offering, and I could be wrong, watch it be the change and not the curveball, but in my mind, it's the curveball, that gives you a head start.
Good to hear. So it looks like a lot of interesting names to track the next couple of years. As far as, and I know it's hard to say and not really fair, but if you were to give an overall grade for the Rays 2024 draft selections, what would you give it and why?
So after all this positivity, can I give him like a BB minus now?
Sure.
Again, I'm fine with the Theo Gillen pick. I get why they made that. I know a lot of people love Petrie. I'm in the minority there. He just wasn't my guy at that point. So that kind of, and then losing Bell kind of hurts as well. If any fans are curious, the way it'll work, by the way, is I assume it's the same for those comp picks as it is for the 3rd round. I could be wrong. There's either one of two ways. So either it'll be, since they picked 66 this year, they would get 67 next year. Or for sometimes these later picks, it's you get a pick at the end of that round. So the end of comp B. So either way, it's going to be somewhere probably around, 67 to 70-ish. So they'll have that pick. I don't know if next year's class is deeper or not. Honestly, I've not dived in full onto it. Jamie Arnold is my favorite player so far in that class, the Florida State pitcher, but it could totally change and adjust. This time a year ago, I would have been on, Kurtz and Bazan were near the top for me, but it'll be interesting to see how it shifts and then how the Rays kind of react to it, because maybe they're in a Cleveland-like situation where Cleveland did the sell-off a year ago. That's why, we traded Savale to you guys, and then we tried to rebound the next year. So it'll be fun to see him go. The problem for me is giving the Rays a B- is just going to make me look dumb in 5 years when it's like I didn't know Ryan, Andre as well, and it turns out that Andre didn't that I should have known him better, or that some of these day 3 guys are going to turn out to be really good that I didn't follow. It's not an organization that I want to grade low just because I feel like it's going to come back and make me look dumb. This is the clip in 5 years.
Right. No, understood. So, and that was a follow-up question. 2025, are there kind of a handful of names who are vying for, hey, this will be the consensus top pick when we get to that point a year from now?
So Jamie Arnold, Florida State's he might have been the best pitcher in college baseball this year. I would have taken him over Chase Burns if he was available, honestly. A lot of people talk about Jace Violet, the center fielder from Texas A&M. My one concern there is a big separator stat we have seen is if your K rate is over 20%, that's a concern. For whatever reason, because it typically gets worse. Let's be honest. You're not going to K less in the pros than you did in college. So his was over 20. We'll see if it can drop below, but guys who's, junior year over 20. So he's got something that's already kind of there, the swing and the miss. Cam Camarilla at Clemson is, I don't know if he's got big time power, but he's definitely a table setter, get on base, speed, center field type. I'm blinking on the kid, Devin Taylor from Indiana. I don't know if he's necessarily first overall, but if the Rays are picking back into the top 10, he's a guy who is putting on a show in the Cape right now. And we talked about Emil Petrie was probably some of that was getting to see him perform at that Cape level. So, Indiana hasn't had a high first rounder, and Kyle Schwarber, right? That's probably it. So he's doing well in the Cape. He's really lighting things up. Might be a name to watch. Ethan Petrie, not Petrie. Too many, getting these confused in my head. Who I'm trying to think if he ended up transferring or not. There was rumors he would. I believe he was at South Carolina before. It's kind of a guy who might also be in that later top 10 range. And then there'll just always be, there's a few of the prep guys, and I'm blanking top of my head on there's there's 2 guys who might go in the top 10 from Corona High School and in California. And I don't want to mislabel anyone. So, I always start with the college guys first and then kind of catch up on the prep players. But it looks like it should be a comparable group at the top. And then we'll have to see about the overall depth, but it's a fun, it looks interesting on paper, this far out, though your guess is as good as mine. Though I will say, that my way too early mock draft actually had 2 picks right this year for the first time ever. So maybe I'll have a better guess by the end of the season. We'll have to see.
You have to try Liquid IV's Firecracker flavor. It's a surefire summer hit. You get hydrated with electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients from the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. It's really quite simple to use, and you can use it anywhere. If you are having a flight, during a workout, if there's hot days, and if you're in Tampa Bay, guess what? There's plenty of those days. So tear, pour, live more. 1 stick and 16 ounces of water hydrates you better than water alone. There's no need for more thirsty summers when you indulge in hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you get to liquidiv.com. Use code MLB at checkout. Pretty easy code, MLB. 20% off your first order when you shop better. Hydration today using promo code MLB at liquidiv.com.
Look at that. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned Ethan Petrie. He's a local kid from my neck of the woods in Pasco County. He went to Cypress Creek High School from Land O'Lakes, Wesley Chapel area. So I think
I like him.
Brother as well that played college baseball or maybe just a year younger or something like that. But that's good to hear. So now I want to get your take on the Guardians' #1 pick this year. What did you make of that? I think it's the first time that a second baseman has been taken #1 overall, Travis Bazana.
It is. So I always bring up the fact that Cleveland's never picked #1 overall. And my favorite random factoid is, for those who don't know, Cleveland was terrible in the 80s, and they picked, it used to be AL would get the first overall pick and NL, and it would vacillate every year. So Cleveland, when they were at their worst, was always the NL's year. and they took Greg Swindell, turned into a good player, and Mark Lewis, who did not. In between, the one year where they needed to be bad, if they could have been bad 3 years in a row, was Ken Griffey Jr. So they had just great, not doing the right thing, not pulling it off. They picked second overall like 5 times and only had one everyday player to show for it through those eras. Bazan was my number one guy throughout the process. He just does everything. And I know a lot of people, Charlie Condon had fantastic numbers and Jack had fantastic numbers. They said Jack's chase is a concern because that high of a chase rates don't typically change. And it's like, yeah, Julio Rodriguez and Salvador Perez are all sometimes in that 33 to 37 range. There's another really good player, Luis Robert. But, it's also like Javi Baez leads baseball at 40%. And it's a lot of guys like Ernie Clement. Like it's not a murderer's row of top production. So that was like his separator, as well as he's, not a two-way guy. Let's be honest. No one is. We should just appreciate Ohtani as a generational talent and realize that's likely the end of two-way guys. And Condon, he had a small but not great sample on the Cape, and then he also wanted a lot of money. And he's a guy who plays on the corners. Bazana, he up the middle player. I think he could probably handle center. He runs well. In the separator, and not everyone works hard. You hear stories. I've heard the stories over the years about the guys who work and the guys who don't. But Bazana is a guy who just baseball is it for him. Last year there's the infamous stories that like he would drive 3 or 4 hours each way to go to drive line because he wanted to change a swing because he was not optimizing it to tap into power. And you can look at what happened with him this year, and the power numbers exploded. It did for everyone. His 20 home run records were broken this year in college baseball. So there's a lot of things going on under the hood in college baseball. But he left Oregon State, which is it's where Stephen Kwan's from, Adley Rushman, a lot of excellent players, as the hits leader, the home run leader, the double leader. He owned the entire record book when he left, and just a killer work ethic. And there's not a lot of. The biggest negatives are, he's probably 6 feet even or 5'11", and that he's physically maxed out. When those are your biggest concerns, he just felt really safe. He's one of the safest prospects I've seen. I know other people, a lot of our fans want them to go for more power, but I think there is value in getting a guy who looks like a very safe bet to be an elite talent.
Good to hear. Jeff, you're the man. How can people find your amazing work?
You can follow me on Twitter. I'll tweet things out there. I'm at Jeff MLB Draft. It is a lot of Guardian stuff. It is, some, reactions to trades. So there's race stuff. And with that, and you can follow Locked on Guardians on YouTube or Twitter or anything like that. If you want more draft content, I live streamed the entire draft, all 3 days. Wow. So you can go back if you want to. I did not timestamp it well or at all. So, you might have to do some moving through. But you'll hear reactions to a lot of the race selections in there. If you want some additional context, you can see the moment it occurs and my thoughts. But yeah, I'm sick. I'm such a fan of the draft that I decided, like I said, live stream the whole thing. So if you want more draft content, there's about 17 hours waiting for you.
There we go.